do you feel about my periscoping you?
I don't even know what that is.
You don't even know.
No.
Well, it means people that aren't here can watch you,
Well, they're recording it in the back.
but they can watch you right now.
Oh yeah, I don't.
Live.
I don't. Wow.
Yeah.
I don't. I mean, I don't care, but I don't know. Did you know?
It's like a
What,
live
is
feed.
that approved by the sponsors? Are you part of the
I am.
sponsorship team? So you're okay. Well, so you're
It's
saying.
approved by me, and I'm
Okay.
doing it from the official Southeast
Well,
Region.
okay then. That's fine. Then that's
Go.
great. Then I think it's wonderful.
That's a great answer.
Do I have to sign a waiver or something? Like.
No.
You already did.
Did I? Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
All right,
You
so
just
I've got
get to be
to use
you.
this.
You're just.
It's fine.
See, maybe your adjustment score isn't as high as you thought it was.
But I am very easygoing.
Are you?
Yeah, I am.
Are you?
I am.
Okay.
Ask Jason.
Okay.
I am.
All right. That's good. Jesus, 12:30. Should we get started, or should we wait for the
Just
camera
wait.
crew to come?
Yeah. Camera crew.
Or is it just going? Does it just start at 12:30?
I'm not really sure. I thought he was coming back.
I did too. I don't know how it works. Are they going to give us a signal?
They didn't say.
Yeah, they didn't. They didn't say anything about that.
It's kind of vague.
Should we just start? When should we start? It's 12:30. Should we start?
Sure.
Yeah? Is the camera in the back? Oh, here comes the camera guy.
That is a great question.
Yeah,
I'm
all right, I think
deferring
he's
to
here
that
now.
guy.
Are we good back there in the back?
Hi.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you.
I was wondering if you guys are gonna have this session online.
Yeah, she's right over
Yeah,
there.
we're-
She's
we're gonna record all
periscoping
of the
us.
sessions, and I'm periscoping right now, but we're gonna officially record all of the sessions. Yep.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Yeah, because I wanted to be here, but there's another one that I want to be at.
Oh.
They're all at the
Oh,
same
so
time.
you're choosing that one over us,
Conflict,
and you
yeah.
want us to accommodate that. We're second. We're like the backup plan.
No,
Yeah, I got it.
no, I want to go to the process with you because like I already like okay.
There's a trailhead for that, you know. You can just watch Process Builder on Trailhead. This is not on Trailhead.
Okay, you got it.
Okay, so let's go ahead and are we ready in the back? Camera guy, good to go? All right, thank you. I'm sorry I called you camera guy. I don't know your name. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. This is an innovative approach to end user training. My name's Steve Wasula, and I'm going to be presenting today along with Karen Moss from Epic Response. Before I get started, I wanted to thank all of our sponsors for the event, all of our platinum sponsors. Without the sponsorship, this wouldn't be possible. So thank you. Actually, we do business with several of these sponsors, so great to see them here as well. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here is I am president of a company called Stony Point, and we specialize in Salesforce adoption. And Karen works for a company called Epic Response, which is one of our customers. And so we are working with Epic Response to do their implementation of a lot of different pieces of Salesforce. And so Epic Response, who is Epic Response? They're here, based in Marietta, Georgia. They're a disaster recovery firm. Now, not necessarily the way you would think of IT disaster recovery. This is the entire business continuity piece, the physical recovery of a disaster, whether you have a fire, whether there's a natural disaster. Epic Response provides those services here in the metro Atlanta area. And they really, they focus not just on helping you recover from a disaster, but actually helping you plan and avoid the disaster in the first place. So rather than recover from a fire, they can actually prevent the fire from happening in the first place, or try to help you do that. They are a very innovative, technology-savvy company. With their CEO is really a thought leader in that space, and the utilization of technology to improve that business. So they've got Salesforce. They have 70 users. They're using Enterprise Edition, and they have 70 employees and 70 users. So every single employee uses the system every single day. They've got Sales Cloud, they've got Service Cloud, they've got Community Cloud, they've got Custom Cloud, and this project we're talking about here, they're using an ERP type system called Accounting Seed that helps them with their finance and their project management. Because a lot of what they have to do in a disaster is construction project management, and they're doing all of that within Salesforce. Stony Point is the company that I work for, and we focus on Salesforce adoption. So we do consulting and integration, training, recruiting, all of the things that you would need to have a successful Salesforce adoption. So our approach is to help companies get the full value out of Salesforce. And what we've done here with Epic is we've helped them with the Sales Cloud, the Community Cloud, the Custom Cloud, and there's another partner in there helping them do the Accounting Seed and project management implementation. We're also helping them with Pardot. And so we helped them with the consulting piece, some of the implementation of this, and training. So when we talk about adoption, what is adoption? This is, adoption, you hear that word used a lot. The way we define it is users using the system the way it's intended to be used. So it depends on your company what you want to get out of Salesforce. So at Epic, they wanted to get a lot out of the system. Now we have a whole webinar series on adoption and the 6 steps to adoption. What we're talking about here, and that's this webinar series here, you can get to our website and see it if you want. This is, in order to get adoption, you put the right team in place, you make sure the team is trained, you go through, you want to use Agile and do an Agile implementation, you go through a rollout and user training, then onboarding, continuous onboarding and training, and then ongoing support and enhancements. What we're focusing on here in this session is step number 4, which is how do we, when the system is built, and we've iterated through and done it well, and we have a system that aligns with our business processes, how do we get people to use it? How do we get them to use it effectively as quickly as possible? And that's what we're focusing on here. So the traditional approach to training, the best practices for training, we want to train role-based. So if you're a salesperson, go to training on how to be a salesperson. If you're customer service, don't go to the salesperson training, go to the customer service training. Scenario-based training, right? Give people real-world scenarios when they go about in the training. Don't give them hypotheticals, give them real world. This is what you do in your job. When this scenario happens, this is what you do. That's how end users benefit. Technologists like yourself, a lot of you are technologists, you can benefit from the hypothetical, how does the technology function? But end users don't benefit. They don't really care how it functions or what it's meant to do or what else it can do. They just want to know how do they use it to do their job. So it's really important you give them real scenarios. We talk about training as teams. So your manager's in the room reinforcing the training. We like to train on a live system. With sales, we like the live system. With other environments, like when you're training finance, customer service, you might train in a sandbox. But it's important to train, just like it's important to have real world scenarios, it's really, really important to give them data they're familiar with. If they work with ABC company every day and your training is on company 1, 2, 3, and they don't recognize any of the names, any of the history of that company, it's a lot less relevant. So the more we can give them data that they're familiar with, the more effective the training is, because they don't have to learn who company ABC is. They already know what company ABC does and who they are and the people there. And then, of course, we like to do hands-on training as well to reinforce what we're talking about. And then you can't do effective training learning is not a one-time event. You don't go to a session, you don't go to training for a week, and then you never need to learn anything new, right? You forget what you learn in a session. Studies are somewhere around, 50 to 80% of what you learn in a one-time learning event, you forget within a couple of months. So you can't just do one training, you have to reinforce it over time. Now, in Epic's case, they were going to leave the training and go do it hands-on and use it immediately after the training. But a lot of times people don't use the system every day, so you have to have a plan in place to reinforce the training over time. But what Epic did, and Karen is going to come up and talk about that, was they added another dimension, which is training by learning style. And that's what we're going to talk about mostly today. And Karen's going to talk about that. And some of you may not even know, there are learning styles, and she's going to talk about that as well. But so this is what, if Stony Point were to go do a typical training engagement, this is what it would look like. We would train the executives and the managers on reports. We would do typical Salesforce implementation, 8-hour hands-on session with each team for their role-specific functionality, what they're going to learn. And then we're going to follow it up with one-on-one coaching sessions to make sure that people can demonstrate the skills they learned in the class. We also want the managers participating, starting to run their sales meetings, their team meetings utilizing Salesforce, as opposed to, okay, we're using Salesforce now, so put everything in Salesforce, but then in preparation for our meeting, fill out this spreadsheet or fill out this Word document. It's how do we use Salesforce to manage our business? And then the last one is we recommend putting the managers together, getting just the managers together to talk about how they're using the system, what's working for them, what's not working for them, and collaborate on growing the system. So, with Epic Response, here was the scenario that we had. It was not a typical Salesforce implementation, because a typical Salesforce implementation how many people in here have every single employee in their company utilizing Salesforce every day? So there's one, right? One, and somebody who works for Stony Point raised his hand too. So there's 2 of us in here, and 3, Karen, Stony Point, and that gentleman in the back, all have every employee using Salesforce every day, but most of us do not. So this was an atypical implementation, to be sure. They had finance, construction, project management, dispatch of sending people out, time tracking, accounting, the full thing. This is their entire business. Karen, does anything run there aren't really any systems that aren't on Salesforce, right?
They're not, and what we do is for any additional applications that we want, like when we were looking at HR, for example, we found an app that actually ran on the Salesforce platform. So whatever it is we're going to use, it has to run on the Salesforce platform.
That's right, that's Financial Force HCM, exactly. So, okay, so, and actually Stony Point does Financial Force Partner as well. Okay, so anyways, all employees would receive training. Okay, they all had to receive training. So emergency response, project management, construction, finance, sales, and marketing. And then a lot of the training was the same, right? They would we want scenario-based training for the scenarios you would be involved in, but a lot of these employees overlap. So a lot of the training would be the same, right? And then, but some groups would still receive unique training to their role. And then the way it went was Stony Point helped them develop the training material. And then Epic Response decided to use their own resources, who were subject matter experts. Because this is another thing that's very important when you do end user training. Industry knowledge, understanding of the role that you're teaching is really important for the learners in the room, because they're not going to ask questions about, well, what can I do from a workflow rule? They're not interested in that. They're like, when I'm filling out form 1142B, how do I do that in Salesforce? And if your trainer doesn't know what a form 1142B is, they start to lose a lot of credibility in the room. So, when we staff projects, we always look for industry knowledge, because that goes a long way towards building credibility with the learners. So the technology, a lot of times for an end user training, the technology experience isn't necessarily as important as the industry experience. So just something, to keep in mind. But so this is where Stony Point's involvement stopped. Epic said, we're gonna train our own folks ourselves. Thanks for building material. We're gonna go on and do it. So then the way this went about, before I tell the story, there's one thing. While I'll tell the story, Jason, who's the CEO of Epic, and I were having a conversation one day, and I'm kind of a futurist, and I was talking about how computers will someday do everything for us. And I was telling him how eventually people will just learn from computers, and because the computer will present everything in their own learning style. And there's 3 different types of learning styles. Everybody has a preferred learning style. Whether you knew it or not, everybody has a preferred learning style. There's the people who like to learn by listening and reading. Then there's the people who like to learn by watching or seeing graphics and things like that. Like if you're a person who really likes to see somebody draw on a whiteboard or a diagram or flow charts, you're a visual learner. And then there's the kinesthetic or tactile, which is the people who like to do hands-on. Okay, they learn by doing. Now what's funny about this is Karen and I joked, so far, when we looked at our presentation, if you're an auditory learner, this is great. You're loving this, right? If you're visual, or you're tactile, you're kind of like, oh, this is taking forever. Because you're not participating the way you're not learning the way you want to learn. And so a session like this that's short, we can all learn in different styles, but your preferred method is going to be dominant, right? So here's what happened, right? Is I'm going to tell Karen talk about how that went on behind the scenes and what Epic did. So please welcome Karen Moss.
I need you to do the control.
Oh yeah, I'm going to keep. All right.
Thanks for being here this afternoon. I appreciate it. So what happened was we said, there's got to be something to this about people's learning styles. And Jason and I talked about it, and we looked at the initial training that we had done with Salesforce, where it was one size fits all. And we had mixed results, because after we did our initial training, we did a survey, SurveyMonkey, and we had some mixed results. People said, it didn't really apply to me, I didn't really understand this. These are some of the quotes that I pulled. The class was too big, it was too many hours, it didn't really apply to my particular position in the company. I'd really like to have additional training that is more job specific. And the class was too long, it was too much information. So that was the kind of feedback when we did the traditional classroom style training where everybody was included. And so when we looked at those results, we said, you know what? There's got to be a better way. And we had talked about how do we really hone the training to the type of learning style that people have. When we really got into that and really started digging. And as Steve had already mentioned, we had the different styles that we identified. And so one of the things that I did was I thought, there's got to be a way out there, a real simple way to figure out what people's learning styles really are. And so, bless you. And so we went to this very simple, we found a simple website, 20 questions. I just wanted to show you one of them. 20 questions. Have you ever wondered what it's like? What kind of book would you like to read for fun? So very simple questions. They weren't intimidating. It didn't take very long. What we did was we sent this out to everybody and said, you know what? For the next set of training that we're going to do, digging more into Salesforce and the modules that we're going to focus on, we really want to take a different approach to training. We want to find out what your learning style is and then gear the training toward your particular learning style. And so people really liked the idea of that. We sent them the link, they went to the website, it just took them a few minutes to answer the questions, and then they ended up getting a report that basically said, okay, X% tactile, X% visual, X% auditory.
So so how many of you picked up your phones and went to that website now? Probably a good chance that you're a tactile learner, right? That you're like, okay, great, I'm gonna get something I enjoy. So that's a hint. Take the test, but you probably already know the answer. Sorry, go ahead.
That's fine, that's fine. So that's what we ended up doing, and so what are we going to do with all this information? So we kind of did a master spreadsheet. We put each person's name and then what percentage they were. And the interesting thing is, how many of you think that everybody is just one particular learning style? No, what we found is that people obviously had a combination. There was usually one that was predominant, but in some cases people were tied. So it was very interesting to look at the organization and look at every single person and see what was their primary learning style, secondary, and then the third. And so what we did was we came up with this master plan based on each person, and we had identified trainers in our organization, people that were very, very good with communication skills. They had a particular learning style. A couple of them had educational backgrounds. And so what we did was we identified several trainers, and then we matched the trainers up with the people in a particular learning style. And we did this master sheet that you can see. The colors, again, are for the visual folks. So what we did was we looked at everybody's schedule, and we put together sessions that were geared toward what their learning style was and what they needed to learn, because we had several modules that we wanted to cover. So if you had nothing to do with time scans, for example, you would not learn that particular module. So it was going to be applicable to what your position was. If you're a project manager, if you're an estimator, if you're a project coordinator, whatever. So we geared it toward what your role was, which modules you were going to learn, and then we kept it very short. No session was more than an hour to an hour and a half, because after that you lose people. And so we set it up by their schedules. We made it easy for them, smaller groups. And then the interesting thing was that depending on which particular learning style, group of people who had a particular learning style, you would use materials or you would develop the curriculum as the trainer based on that group's learning style. So if someone was tactile, for example, what do you think we would do? And so what would we do with hands-on with something like this, do you think?
Labs, go through, look over the shoulder, coaching.
Exactly. Small groups. We actually gave them an exercise to do ahead of time to bring in with them a real live scenario that we had used, that they would be using. So that worked really well, but the point is that each instructor came up with curriculum, materials, videos, whatever it is they needed based on the particular learning style. And that seemed to work extremely well. So then what happened was, after going through this exercise and we got everyone trained, we did a survey, just like we had done the first time. And the results were great. For the most part, I took a couple of quotes from the survey. People really appreciated being in the smaller groups, having sessions that were applicable to their position and applicable to their learning style. It clicked for them. And it was kind of one of those aha moments, like, wow, this is really a great concept. In the future, we need to do this kind of training. So they felt like the trainers were well prepared. They could relate to what their position was. And the reason for using the internal trainers, who knows your company better than somebody who's actually working for the organization and understands the particular positions? So that had a lot to do with who we picked as trainers as well. They understood. So the feedback that we got was excellent. People really got a lot out of it, and it was very, very positive feedback. Very successful. So what did we find out? Interestingly enough, what we found out was visual was the most common learning style. And then we also found out, guess what? No surprise that people had almost tied in more than one learning style, sometimes more than that, like 3. But what we decided was, okay, initially, we were going to develop training for each learning style, so basically 3 different types of learners. So from the feedback that we got, we actually expanded that. So perhaps someone was a visual auditory, or someone was a visual tactile. So we developed training based on those as well. Again, to really gear the training to specific folks that we thought it would be very, very successful if we did that. So, what's the takeaway in terms of if you're teaching someone, if you're going to auditory, you want someone who is an animated presenter, someone who they can hear well, using an external monitor, computer, and iPad. If someone was the tactile, then the visual, then obviously something they could see, logging in, computer and iPad, provide examples on a large monitor. And this group, interestingly enough, because they're visual, might want to take notes. So we had paper, pens, highlighters, because that's their style, that works for them. And then the last group, the tactile, again, letting them log in. We let them do things, exercises ahead of time. It was smaller groups. The instructor walked around the room. The instructions were provided as reference material. We did not teach to the group. And we put the agenda in bullet points on the whiteboard. That appealed to them. So again, really focusing on what their needs were. And then here's an example of people that were visual tactile. So for them, the login, instructions, computer and iPad, instructions provided as reference materials. We provided examples on a monitor. Again, this group would take notes. So again, really focusing on what the particular combination of learning styles was. So what are our results? We have decided, based on the success of really focusing on the learning styles, that in the future, any type of training that we do, we are going to use the same concept. Because it was extremely successful. People really got it. They were trained on something that was applicable to their role. They understood it because we appealed to their particular learning style. And even though on the front end it took a lot of time to put all of this together, we felt it as though it was well worth it. Because the whole objective in the training that you're doing is you want the end result to be that the user is going to adopt it, they're going to use it, it's going to be practical, they're going to run with it. And so we feel as though it's well worth it on the front end to have gone through that, develop this, and use it for future training. And in fact, I will share with you, we're looking at another app that we're going to be using for goal setting, and we're going to do the same kind of thing, same kind of training. Challenges. You might think, well, you know, this could be very expensive, very time-consuming on the front end. But again, we felt as though looking at the survey results from doing it the traditional way to the survey results that we had of doing it the new way, it just made more sense to us. Much more successful, a greater success in adoption. Expensive, economy of scale. We're a small business. You know, we have 70 employees. For those who have larger organizations, perhaps, you know, it's easier to do because you can repeat it over and over. And then Steve has shared with me that this is something that Stony Point is working on adopting, which would be great.
Sure. So, yeah, let me jump in. Thank you very much,
Sure,
Karen.
sure.
So, when we talk about the challenges, right, it is expensive. What makes it expensive? Anybody know? It's time consuming. In what? How much, you know, as Karen talked about, right, we have to develop how many different variations of our curriculum, right? So that's challenging. So it's expensive to develop the curriculum, right? And then how many classes that we're running small class sizes, right? And so that's expensive. And we have to do a lot of different, we have to prep our instructors to be able to deliver that. And then we have to, professional instructors are taught to be able to deliver in a way, to manage a classroom in a way that reaches all the learning styles, right? So that, you know, we have visual cues, we're animated, and we have whiteboards, you know, and we do hands-on, you know, a well-designed curriculum has hands-on. So we go in and we say, okay, we're gonna do, every session we do is going to reach all three types of learners. But in every one of those sessions, about a third of it is not reaching you as a learner. Right now, everybody, you know, as Karen said, everybody learns in one or two styles. They have a preference. They can learn in another style, and they can sometimes learn in a third style, but most people are going to have a preference or a preference of one of two of the three learning styles. But that still means that a third of the time in a classroom, probably you're not learning very much, right? I mean, how many people had a class in school where they really just didn't like the instructor? Anybody have a teacher they just didn't like or just couldn't learn from that teacher? Knowing what you know now about learning styles, what do you think the problem probably was? Why was that teacher, when other people said they were a good teacher and you thought they were a terrible teacher, why do you think that probably was? They didn't match your style. Like if you're an auditory learner and you go to a professor who's an eloquent speaker and just so articulate and so interesting to listen to, but you're a visual learner and all they do was go through slides, bullet points on a slide deck. If you're auditory, that's fantastic. But if you're visual, that's like, it's a waste of time. So how many people were familiar with learning styles before they came into this classroom? All right, so how many people have read studies that say that you know, even though people have a preferred learning style, we should still teach them in all 3 styles. Has anybody seen those studies? Because there are some studies out there that seem to you know, discount this idea that, well, sure, everybody has a preferred style, but they need to learn in all styles, right? And so what's interesting about that is that, to me, is a little bit, there's some credence to it when you're young and you're going through regular education, regular public school education. Teaching kids to learn in all styles is probably productive because throughout their life they're going to meet different people who try and teach them in different ways, right? But what we're trying to do here is we're trying to train adults, and if they have a preferred learning style, right? This is not an academic exercise to teach them how to use Salesforce to do their job, right? What's the goal here? When you talk about training your adult learners, don't you want them to enjoy the training? Like, how many people don't want their employees to enjoy their job? Raise your hand if you feel good, if you're a manager or something like that, you feel good when your employee had a terrible day at work, right? What if they had, like Karen said, what if they had a great day at work? You know, the science behind this, it's certainly, there's no scientific proof right now that says that training in your preferred style leads to more learning. Okay, there's nothing that people learn this way. They may learn quicker, they may not. There's no scientific proof. There's definitely proof that people prefer one way or the other. There's no proof that says they learn more because it was in their style, but they do learn it quicker and they certainly enjoy it more, right? And so when you look at that, there is an added expense. There's an added expense of doing it, which is why not a lot of companies are doing it, right? And why people are saying, well, you can't do it that way. It's too expensive. I've got 1,000 employees. They've all got different roles. I've got 100 salespeople, all with different learning styles. So instead of doing 10 classes, you know, you're telling me I have to do, 20 or 25 classes. But as you get to a larger organization, you can get an economy of scale. What Epic did was they had to build really unique training for a very small number of people, making it, on a per learner basis, a pretty expensive endeavor. But when you start to look at a big organization, putting in the extra time to split it out by learning style can give you a much higher return on your investment. You spend the extra time, but think about it. How many people read books on their own for fun? Raise your hand if you read books on your own for fun. Or watch movies. How many people watch like the Learning Channel or the Discovery Channel and Ancient Aliens, right? Anybody watch that? My favorite one is Through the Wormhole. Anybody watch Through the Wormhole? Anyways, okay. But I was a history major in college, and that's science, and I hated science, But it's like we all like to learn. So if we can find a way as corporate environment to get people excited about learning, get people excited about going to training and walking out of training, excited about their job and excited about the investment, that the company's making in them, I think it's worth the investment. And it's something that you should be exploring for sure. So, but anytime you're doing something that's different, that goes against conventional wisdom, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get the funding to do this. So you want to have, some case studies. Epic is a great case study for us as far as how this worked and how they did it. And so we're gonna keep pushing towards this. What we find as a consulting company is we have best practices and we say this is what you should do. And then at the end of the day, the customer ultimately decides what they want to do, right? And so you guys are probably in the same position. You can go back in and say, hey, I think we should do this, but it's going to cost this. And they'll go, well, no, let's just, do a video. So, but be prepared, obviously, for pushback if you go in and say, we should do this. But Karen, for sure, is willing to share, their approach with anybody who wants to talk about it. And certainly we're willing to, talk to you guys about it as well. Our contact information is going to be included. You'll get the decks, so you'll get all our contact information. But it's kind of a provocative topic. I know some of a lot of you raised your hand. You're already familiar with learning styles. So what we wanted to do was leave some time, for questions about maybe specifically what Epic did, if there's questions about training in general. But we open the floor for questions now. Just if you have a question, just raise your hand. We'll go. Wow. Okay. A lot. Good. We'll start out here. I'll just go right to left. Go ahead, sir.
So my question is, have you guys tried to apply this in onboarding new employees? How can this be applied to
It's a great question, right? The question was, if you didn't hear it, how does this apply to onboarding, right? And certainly onboarding is always a challenge. It should, in all honesty, the theory, but now this is new, right? This is relatively new. Epic was our first client to do it, so we don't have a lot of case studies on this, right? Obviously, a lot of experience with this. But theoretically, if what Epic saw is true and holds true, you should be able to do it with onboarding, and certain types of employees would be easier to onboard than others. Like, for example, when you get a tactile learner, right? Onboarding for them should actually be a lot better than giving them a bunch of videos to watch, because instead you give them a login and you hand them some exercises and they go do it, and they rapidly get up to speed for those types of learners. For the other types of learners, you've got very specific programming. So our estimate, my estimate, is that onboarding would be about 33% faster, because instead of them doing things that they don't learn from, they're only doing things in a style that they learn from. Where it gets, it still gets expensive if we have to onboard an employee and we have one new visual learner coming on board, then we have to do a visual learner type training. So that's where it gets expensive. And so, what I'd recommend for onboarding is we do have a webinar on onboarding and the best practices for that. And so you have to, onboarding, you can't just have an instructor sitting there training. I mean, it'd be great if you could. I'm never going to tell you not to have an instructor there to train each new employee one-on-one. But it gets into manager involvement, manager understanding the learning styles, managers participating in it, having a combination of pre-recorded session, computer-based training, things like that. But theoretically, this should make onboarding more effective. Great question. All right. Do we have a question on this side? All right, we'll move over here. Yes.
What about remote users and I find it hard to know if I'm keeping their attention or know if they're learning correctly. Other than kind of like a survey monkey. What's kind of best practices around?
Yeah, we do. So that's a great question. Online training, what we're finding, we do a ton of that at Stony Point. We do, all of our public class schedule is online. And it's certainly a skill. It needs to be interactive. But to Karen's point, most of our classes, our online classes, we limit. People still like to send somebody to training all day. Even though, we know, professional instructors know, professional trainers educate people, you can't learn for 8 hours a day. Like, even though you're at training for 8 hours a day and you're learning it all, you're not actually learning it. You get tired, especially in an online environment. When you're in an online environment, it's so important to be interactive, to use tools like you can use, GoToTraining or WebEx Training Center, but you can use GoToMeeting and things like that. But to ask questions and wait for the response. You have to train your instructor, whoever's going to be doing that instruction, to be more interactive, to ask questions. I asked a lot of questions during this session because that's, I'm an instructor, and so you're just used to that. You want to keep the students engaged. But that's a specific learning skill. And so what they did at Epic was they took people who had good communication skills and did that. What I would recommend is that the people who have good communication skills, they also go through some type of program as far as instructor preparation and how they would do that. Or if you're at a really big company, you can get an instructor who is if they're teaching tactile students, they're tactile. So they understand what that person on the other end is feeling. They're not going to do things that won't relate to that person. But it's certainly a challenge in an online environment. But what we're finding is that more and more, even our learners want to do virtual training. Like, I'll give you an example. We had a customer in Alexandria, Virginia, and we had 3 weeks of training during both of the snowstorms, like in Alexandria. And Alexandria doesn't have any ability to plow snow. They just wait till it melts, seems to be their approach. So the students all had an excuse to not come into the office. The customer had paid for us to come on site and do training, and they all had a reason to stay home. And even after the roads were open, there was one day I was there staying in Alexandria, went to the office, and nobody showed up. We had 25 students. They all stayed at home. And we finally mandated they come into the office. So if you do it right, people are liking staying at home and learning. And they're able to stay engaged. And it really gets into, that's an interesting question. That's not just about learning style, but it's about the relevance of the material to the effectiveness of their job. That training for us was certification, preparation. So they were all mandated to get certification, so they were very interested in it. So Great question, though. Yeah, next question. We have no, yes.
So you actually just touched on this, but I was curious in your case, Karen, if you guys, with your trainers, if you specifically picked a trainer with the same learning style as the learning group.
Absolutely, we did.
Okay.
Yeah, because they could relate to that group. You know, not, so it was not only the fact that they understood their role or their job in the company, but they had the same learning style. Yes.
That's awesome. It's nice in your case that you were able to use internal trainers.
You know, and that's what if there's any way you can do that, it's so much more effective because again, someone who works in the company understands the roles, they understand how we do things. You know, like, that was the thing, how do we do things at Epic? And so, again, when you have that, the learning just becomes so much easier.
Right.
And they weren't professional trainers, but they communicated extremely well, and we knew they'd be able to get the point across.
Great. Yeah,
Are
go.
there any good like online tools that you have found maybe for training that's done without an instructor, more kind of like a do-it-yourself training where the person is kind of clicking around and going through modules?
Karen could probably better answer that question because our focus is on instructor-led training, right? So, but Karen, I don't know what you've found.
As far as online, there's some, see me afterwards and I'll give you some sources. Yeah.
Great. Now, one of the things that Epic turned us on to, it's another thing with onboarding. We haven't adopted it at Stony Point, but we're growing pretty rapidly and onboarding a lot of people. There is they're using it at Epic. It's called lynda.com, Lynda.com. If you haven't heard of it, it's quite fascinating. They've got several thousand titles of training on all your normal technologies. It's not, obviously, it's not customized to your specific environment, but, you know, we use Google as our product. And when we bring on new people, you know, everybody's used Outlook. I mean, we have so many people even familiar with Salesforce who've used Outlook their whole life. And when you have to give up Outlook, right, Jim? When you have to give up Outlook, it's like losing a child. Not quite. I mean, that's way extreme. It's like losing a pet that you had for a while. All right, and so not a child. That was. But so, but you know, you don't want to stop using Outlook, and so getting them to use Google is tough. And so, you know, it's a tool that we're looking at because it seems to have a lot of promise, and it's just this library, this huge library of technical training. Another question. Yes,
Within the Epic example, was there a credentialing process?
Karen.
No, there was not. The folks that we used, the first group that was trained, they actually went through the beta testing that was being done we had this 10-year proprietary software that we were taking all of this and customizing it into accounting seat on Salesforce. So they were involved in the beta testing. Again, they were great communicators. They really understood the modules we were trying to move from one system to the next in their daily work. They were very good at it. But there was no other credentialing other than that.
Yes.
Just a standard training question. What do you do about supplementary process training? And by that I mean when one group is responsible for one task that tremendously affects the next task that happens. Do you ever train both of those groups so that they can see if something went wrong here, I know it happened there, or if I did this wrong, it's going to screw up there?
No, I think you know, when we talk about it's a good question, and I think when you talk about role-based training, you know, there's no hard and fast rule, right? It's how much of what happened upstream affects them downstream, and if the things that happen upstream have a significant impact on what they're doing downstream, then they should absolutely know what's happening upstream, right? So. So I guess it just depends on the situation, but certainly, you know, finance wouldn't necessarily need to know about, you know, what shipping does, right? But somebody in order entry might need, like shipping might need to understand how order entry does it, because order entry, or, you know, whoever does the bill of lading, if they do it wrong, it's going to affect shipping, and they should look for the signs and understand what goes into it. So I think that overlap, training them on what the people immediately before, makes sense in a lot of circumstances. And you saw, like, the way Epic approached it was they built a lot of very specific modules, and then they kind of tied it together, and they were able to do that because they broke it up into really bite-sized chunks of training, right? They didn't do like an 8-hour session. And really, that, just to highlight that, whether you did learning styles or not, the fact that they broke it up into chunks of 1 to 2 hours over an extended period of time is a far preferable way of learning. I mean, when you went to, when you went to elementary school and middle school and high school, nobody did where you had math on Monday for 7 hours, and then you had English on Tuesday for 7 hours. You got an hour a day of every subject, because that reinforcement over time, that you come in the next day and you review what you learned the day before, and then you learn something new. That's the way we learn the best. So they kind of had the best of both worlds, which was an extended learning period and learning in your style. So I think you break it up into modules and you give people the module that's most appropriate. If you can do it like that, it's great. But that's difficult to do as well, because if you build, a lot of times, the way we build our training classes, a lot of times is you build it with dependencies. That, like when we do our technical classes, you're doing an implementation. So what you did on Monday, you come back and revisit on Wednesday and add on to it. So when you break it up into modules, they have to be self-contained units that don't have any dependencies, which makes it more difficult to develop the training as well. Any more questions? Sylvia has another question. Yes, Sylvia. You're here, right? Yeah, we're here, right? I don't know. What time is it supposed to stop? Is it now 1:15?
The next one is at 1:30.
So we should, okay, so this will be the last question, Sylvia.
No pressure.
Yeah, right, this better be good. Let's go on a high note. So give me a softball here. I told you to give me easy questions.
When you're breaking up your training in small bites and there's no end-to-end training, do you do this before implementation so that by the time you implement, they can get in the system and do the end-to-end tasks? Or
Well, that's a great question. We would not recommend doing training much before the actual rollout, because what happens is if you do training 2 or 3 weeks before rollout, even if it's the right type and incremental over time, if you finish it and then they don't use the system for 3 weeks, there's a tremendous loss of knowledge between the time the training ends and does that. So, you bring up a great point. If you have a mission critical system and they are transitioning to it immediately on Monday, then you don't really have a choice but to get a lot of training. I mean, you can start the training weeks in advance, but that last day of training should probably be the day before they go live. That's how I would recommend doing that. But it's a great question. It's a great question. Well, thank you guys very much for all the questions. So, hope you learned something. Enjoy the rest of the show.